You're live? Great. So I guess we can get started then. All right, so hello everyone. Welcome to the third career panel hosted by 2813. And today we have four guests from 1967. So that would be the Jinxers. So this is really exciting. And just a few things to start off. First off, we're going to be going for hour and a half, give or take a bit. And at the end of the presentation, well, not presentation, panel, we're going to have a Q&A ask session. So if anyone wants to ask questions in the YouTube chat, they will then be relayed to me and I'll ask them at the end of the session. So strongly encourage you guys to ask your questions to our lovely group of mentors. And I think that's it. So we can get started. So first off, we just want to get to know you guys. So we're going to do an introduction. Introduce yourself. What's your career and what do you do? So can you start off, Adriana?
Yes. So my name is Adriana MullaCarillo, and I work as an equipment engineer at ASML. So it's a Dutch company in the semiconductor industry. And our ASML makes the machines that print computer chips. So my whole role in that is to write the procedures that people go into the fab or the factory and do maintenance on our machines. And so they need instructions for how to do that. And so it's a little bit of technical writing and collaboration with the designers on how to do that. So that's where I am now. I don't know.
Great.
Do you want to do any more? Okay.
sounds pretty fun actually. Cool. Yashna, could you go next?
Yeah, so I am working at SpaceX, which, for those who don't know, is a company that works on building rockets and sending satellites up into space, into orbit. And the ultimate goal of the company is to take people to Mars and to get us there. So I'm working on the Raptor engine, which is part of the Starship program, which is the rocket that they do want to get to Mars. And I'm working as the build reliability engineer, which is just kind of a different term for quality engineer for all parts going through machining. So as it goes through machining, I'm just in charge of making sure that the quality of all the parts we're making is really good and that we're making parts repeatably and reliably.
Yeah, I can see that would be really important, especially with such a high stakes mission. So that sounds really interesting, actually. Alvin, could you go next?
Yeah, sure. I'm Alvin Cheng. I am a principal test engineer for BAE Systems. BAE Systems does a little bit of everything, but my particular division does military ground vehicles. So I'm responsible for historically anything from component testing to vehicle level testing. So we'll run the vehicles at different sites and figure out what's working, what isn't working, and when things aren't working, how to address the issues, and it kind of goes from there. But it's pretty interesting, pretty different day to day, and yeah, that's it.
Really cool. Quick question: do you pronounce it as BAE Systems or BAE Systems? Are both good?
Yeah, it's technically was British Aerospace and Equipment or Engineering, but it no longer is that. That changed a while ago. It's just BAE. Initialize each letter.
Great. And then Lauren, could you introduce yourself too?
Yeah, my name is Lauren Fahey. I am a instrumentation engineer at NASA in the Unitary Plan Wind Tunnel. So we have a couple of wind tunnels. We'll do testing for various models. Some of them are like internal to NASA, so like the Space Launch System rocket. And then we also have external customers. So sometimes we'll do testing for like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Department of Defense, stuff like that. I've been doing a lot of work with like the balances that get put in the models. So analysis and research on that. And then prior to that, I used to be in the earth science department doing mechanical design for instruments that were used for atmospheric research.
Yes, that's some pretty cool jobs. All right, thank you guys for introducing yourselves. So now we'll move on to the main questions, the real cool stuff. So here's the first question. The first question is, what did it take to get to where you are in your career? Because you guys have some pretty interesting jobs. And so what did it take? You have to start off from somewhere. So yeah, Yashna, could you answer that?
Yeah. So also for context, this is my first job out of college. I just graduated in December, so still pretty fresh to industry. So my journey here is maybe a little shorter than some of the other speakers, but most of it was through internships and networking while I was in college. So definitely robotics was a good starting point in a lot of different experience working with groups and using different tools. And then every summer through college, I've had a different internship. My most recent one being with SpaceX with the group that I'm now with full-time. So that was really my great connection point to get the full-time job that I have right now. But I think one of the biggest things in just getting to where I am now was hitting up people who I met in school, like seniors who went and got jobs in different areas. Even some of the people I met in high school and asking them about internship opportunities at their companies. So my first one was at Arista Networks, which is in the Bay Area, and they build switches and routers. And I got a connection for that first interview through one of my friend's moms. So, networks in all these random places. My second internship at Collins Aerospace, I got my first interview through a connection through one of the clubs I was in at school. And then at SpaceX, my connection was through one of the alumni who I was good friends with who was working there. So that's been my journey, really.
It's really cool, actually. Yeah. It shows the importance of connections in the workplace.
Yes.
All right. Adriana, how about you?
Yeah. I think I have a little bit of a different story than Yashna because I didn't have a lot of technical internship experience outside of school. So I had kind of figured out that I wanted to do engineering through being on the robotics team at Notre Dame and pursued a double bachelor's degree program in college. So I went to Scripps College and Columbia University in Southern California and New York, respectively. And I think in terms of getting myself to ASML, it was kind of, just did a little bit of career fairs, things like that. But I think I really just lucked out using the school handshake network. And when I first got that opportunity, like Yashna, this is the first company that I've worked for out of college. And so when I first got that job, the first position I was in and have been for about 2.5 years, and I've just transitioned to this new position, was to do customer support. And so that was an opportunity with a ton of travel. So I was really excited about that. And yeah, so I got to learn a lot about this technology that you don't really learn about in school because, you go to school and you get the basics. But a lot of the technology that's at companies is, one, proprietary, and two, it's just new stuff. And so it's not in any typical courses. So had a lot of learning to do, but I also got to travel through Asia and Europe, which was a lot of fun. And now get to kind of use that experience within my new position.
That's great. All right, thank you. Alvin, how about you?
Well, so as these ladies here will like to remind me, my career is a little farther along. I'm a little older. But how I actually started in this career was when I was in college. I was working for another company, defense company, but actually just as an administrative assistant to help pay the bills. It was kind of like a after school position. And through that, I actually picked up a skill called earned value, which is how a lot of military programs and government programs track performance status and schedule. So this was back in Santa Barbara, and my degree is in mechanical engineering. But so I worked down in Santa Barbara for a while, but because it's so expensive to operate in Santa Barbara, both companies I was working for back then decided to relocate out of state. I didn't want to go out of state, so I moved back to the Bay Area, where I grew up. And that skills for earned value was actually what got me into my current employer, BAE, because they were looking for someone who can, which is funny because it has nothing to do with engineering, but it's to be able to track the status of your program, but having a technical background helps you explain and why things may be behind schedule or over cost, hopefully the other way around. But being able to kind of put those into perspective. So I started at BAE that way, through nothing with engineering related. But over the last 10, 15 years, I was able to kind of transition into a more technical role and just grow from there. So a little bit of just picking up different skills and applying it, and also a little bit of time and kind of hard work to kind of get to where I'm at.
Interesting story. Yeah. All right, thank you. And Lauren?
Okay, so I actually started at NASA because of FIRST Robotics. After graduating high school my senior year, I actually heard about, I did a program called the Robotics Academy, and it was put on by the people who actually do a lot of the sponsorships for the FIRST teams, the Robotics Alliance project. So I had actually heard about the Robotics Academy at one of the competitions. My first mentor, Mark Leon, who you guys might be a little bit too young for, he was the blue-haired MC that was at all the FIRST Robotics events. He was actually talking about the program and telling people to apply because it was specifically for students that had robotics experience. So my first internship was right when I graduated high school with them. Through that internship, I was able to make connections, and I actually got somebody else in a different department in the earth science was looking for someone to do some mechanical design. So I got recommended through, I guess, the grapevine or something for that position. And I stayed with that group for almost 5 years while I was doing my undergraduate degree. And then some of the advice that I had gotten from other people that I had worked with, because I was in a contractor position and I would work part-time during school. Some of the advice that I had gotten was to look at pathways internships, which are specific to the government. And it's a pretty cool program. You apply to it while you're still in school. It can be for undergrad, graduate degrees. And if you get the internship, you're pretty much guaranteed, or it's not a full guarantee, but it's a very high turnover rate that you get a job offered to you once you're finished with the degree program. So I took that advice from other people who were saying, the Pathways internship program is like a really great thing. You should go apply for it. And that's how I ended up in the wind tunnel division as a NASA civil servant. So I graduated with my master's degree this last August, and I converted to full-time from being part-time.
Nice. Yeah, I'm noticing a common theme of like, you guys are all like jumping on like opportunities to get to the cool jobs that you are now. So that's pretty cool. Also, by the way, if you guys want to add on to a points that maybe another mentor is making, you are totally free to do that. So just letting you know. Or just like continue a conversation. So yeah, let's get to the second question. So this one gets a little bit more specialized. So in your opinion, what are the pros and cons of your career? What do you like or dislike? Like, what's your favorite things? So Yashna, could you go first?
Yeah, I mean, pros, I think like for me is just like I feel like I'm working in a really cool company that's at a really great place in innovation and doing a lot of crazy new things. Like SpaceX is all over the place with so many different missions and so many different programs. And especially with the engine program that I'm with, like Raptor's developing a ton right now. And like the goal is that it's going to go to the moon like in a few years and then to Mars like after that. So I think the pros are really just I'm in a program that's really cool, which makes it really exciting to like go into work and know like, oh, this is the end goal of the project that I'm working on. Um, yeah, and I mean other general pros, and this is like just general workplace, is that I really enjoy the group I work with. I work with people who are really supportive and nice, who always answer any questions I have and are always willing to lend a helping hand. A lot of people at SpaceX are just like really enthusiastic about the work, which makes it fun to go into. Some of the cons are it SpaceX very much has a startup mentality, so you're spending long hours at work. It's not one of those like 40 hours a week and clock out type of companies. You're putting in at least 50 hours, upwards to 60 hours a week to get the projects done and get the work done. You own like a lot of stuff, which is really cool, but also can be like really stressful sometimes. So I think that's like really the biggest con to the work. But I mean, other than that, like it kind of just comes with the job. Like you don't apply to the company without knowing those are some of the setbacks. Yeah,
Just a built season that doesn't end.
exactly. It really is. I mean, I liked robotics, so I guess I must like my job too. It's the same kind of mentality, just bigger, larger projects.
Yeah, I mean, the mentality is like, yeah, build season's really stressful, but I also love doing robotics, right? So it's worth it. And yeah, it seems really cool to just be able to do something that you're passionate about.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one thing that's really interesting, and I know this is a question for later too, but like it's kind of similar to robotics, at least at SpaceX, where we're working on really crunch timelines. Like everything that comes up, and I mean, like, I'm sure people all have like opinions on Elon Musk too, but like he has like aggressive timelines, and that's why like the company's been able to accelerate at the pace it has. So a lot of times when flow downs come from him on things that need to be done, it's like this should have been done yesterday, like a week ago. Get it done now. And in that sense, it's very much like build season where it was like, guys, why is the CAD not done? Like this needed to be done 2 weeks ago so we could finish the robot on time. And it's like the exact same mentality going into like all these different projects.
It's a cool perspective. Yeah. And SpaceX has been doing very well, so it's cool. All right. How about you, Adriana?
Pros and cons. So I first joined because of the travel incentive, and I will put that proudly as a big plus in my list. We've got, and I think kind of leading into that, I'm working in San Diego, and the people at the San Diego location are great. I think I wouldn't stay around if I wasn't working with people that were really positive and enjoy, collaborating. And I think that's kind of the biggest thing, is having a team that you're working with that that you enjoy. And it's been interesting going around to the different locations and seeing the different culture shifts. And everything has, it's pros and cons. But I'm, from California, so this is kind of a comforting culture to be in, as opposed to moving to Europe. But I think the con was probably going to be that it's a pretty big company, and especially you're working with different time zones. So that can be a challenge. But just in general, there's a lot of people to make things happen. And so you can kind of feel like you're just stuck in kind of this big environment. It's kind of hard to like find your place. if you're not willing to put yourself out there. So that's a challenge, and it's something that you definitely wouldn't get in a small company environment. But you would also have potentially a lot more responsibility and something like that, and with a larger team, you have a lot of people that have your back. So right, everything's kind of a give and take there.
Yeah, that's very true. All right, thank you. How about you, Alvin?
Well, so I think my favorite thing about my job in terms of pros is that it's hardly ever the same day after day. It's something different every day. The way my projects are structured, I support whichever project needs to be tested. So from that perspective, I work on maybe like 5 or 6 different projects a year. And the other thing that's really nice is all my work is very hands-on. So I'll be spending weeks at a remote location on a piece of equipment. We'll be driving it around or putting it through its paces, whatever it is. And different projects have different problems and different things it's trying to address. So I rarely look at like the same problem over and over again. So that's probably the biggest thing is it's not redundant. It's very different from a day-to-day basis. Cons, I think traveling, while as you can imagine, we don't have a lot of real estate in San Jose to do a lot of testing. All of our equipment is ginormous. So I do spend probably anywhere from 60 to 100 days on the road a year. While I don't have kids, so it's a little easier, but for things like built season and stuff like that, it's more of a challenge to kind of work your schedule and get everything done. I've missed a few weeks of built season once or twice a year kind of thing. So it's a little harder to juggle, but even beyond that, I missed my wife's birthday, for example, last week while I was on business travel, which, complicates things. So that's probably biggest con in terms of just, you don't have a lot of flexibility when it comes to traveling, but it is nice because I'm doing something different every time.
The opposite of what I would say, but I don't have someone at home, so that's the difference. But I feel like we've talked about this a little bit too, Lauren, is that travel in a job is highly dependent. Like, make sure you have a good location that you're going to be traveling to.
So I'll say, for example, I spent 2 months in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi. The population of that town was, I think, 3,000 to 4,000 people. We were working 24 hours. We were working around the clock. It was a production line. And so I had the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, and there was only one 24-hour diner in the entire town. So certainly location matters. Most of my job is very U.S. continental. So I've had some fun places I've been to, and I enjoyed those. Like DC was fun. Wisconsin wasn't too bad, but sometimes like middle of nowhere, Mississippi, and where there's really nothing going on. The culture shock is really neat, but that only lasts for a couple of days, and it's like, I can't wait to get out of here. So certainly I think that makes a big part of it too. And I think, as I have a lot of colleagues that have kids and stuff like that. Wife is one thing. Now when you have kids and family, it certainly gets harder and harder to be away 2-3 weeks or 4 or 5 weeks at a time.
Interesting perspective, yeah. I guess like for you, Adriana, I guess you have less to come home to, so travel is more exciting.
I mean, I started traveling with this company right out of college, right? So I knew going into it, I'm young, I want to see what's out there. And right. Fortunately, the way that our travel was set up for that position was we were working shift work, and we would get 3 days on and 3 days off. So we would have kind of an extra long weekend to just go and explore. And so, yeah, I definitely got to take advantage of that and do like Europe road trips, nice. Things like that. So yeah, I mean, that was great. I think it's the right time in my life, at least for me, to do some traveling. So it really worked out.
It's a cool perspective, yeah.
Well, and company pays for a lot of the, like your transportation costs and stuff like that. And that's
per diem is nice.
I will share this anecdotally. I got my wife and I eloped, and we actually, a whole wedding trip was all paid for on the company dime, basically. She flew out to where I was working, and we eloped out there. This was in Reno. So I think it was all, well, not all, but the ceremony and stuff I paid for with my own pocket. But I'm not cheap or anything. It was just interesting observation. So yeah.
Hey, how about you, Lauren? What are the pros and cons of your job?
Well, big pro, it's NASA. I mean, there's cool projects all around, from people doing stuff in space to people doing research in the Earth Science Department about the atmosphere or like the oceans and stuff like that. So there's cool stuff everywhere. The people are really nice, very supportive in terms of developing your career. I want to say some of the cons do fall in with it being the government. So things tend to go a little slow. And I mean, you're going to get paid less than most of your friends that are in private industry. But I have to say a lot of the people that are there because they like the work, and they're not there because they want to make bank. So to tote the travel and brag a little bit, when I was with the Earth Science Department, I got to go to Hawaii for work twice. So that was pretty nice. Much better than middle of nowhere, Mississippi, Alvin.
Nice. Yeah, Hawaii does sound pretty fun to go for work. The excuse to go to a tropical place.
Oh, yeah.
Can't complain. All right. Thank you, guys. Our next question. What is a normal day like in the workplace? Adriana, do you want to go?
Sure. So as an equipment engineer, a lot of my work, and again, I'm still learning the ropes on this one. I transitioned in January, but a lot of it is collaboration. There are plenty of meetings throughout the day. And it takes a whole team to make sure that things are safe, things are designed well with the intent that they're supposed, that they're going to work the way that they're supposed to. We have kind of all of these like checks and balances that go through because we know we're going to have people at the end of this working. So safety plays a big part of that. So yeah, it's that's kind of the bulk of it. We'll get to see a little bit. I'll get to see a little bit more travel. Sorry to go back to that, but it's one of my favorite things about working with this company. But kind of get to go see things in person and do some more troubleshooting as things progress. So for us, like our projects are pretty long-term. So what I'm working on now is got about a year horizon. And so we're, pretty in the beginning stages of things. So a lot of planning right now. And then as things progress, it'll continue to change.
Nice. Also, yeah, in past career panels, we haven't really touched on travel. And I mean, it is part of a lot of jobs. So it's kind of cool to get this new perspective on a new topic that we haven't really discussed. So yeah, I very much appreciate the new perspectives.
Yeah.
All right. So next one, what's a normal day like? Yashna, could you go?
Yeah, I mean, like Alvin was saying, like my job's really similar in that like it keeps changing all the time. Like it's the same parts, but like what my focus is in the day like just changes like on a regular basis, like almost on a week-to-week basis. Like the focus of my projects and like where I need to put my attention changes. But like in general, it's a lot of just putting out fires. So like anytime there are escapes or things aren't working or things are like at assembly, things are not fitting together, it's like, hey, what went wrong at machining, or like were there issues? And then I have to go around like talking to lots of different people to figure out what's going on, like why did this go wrong, how do we solve this so that it doesn't happen again, and how do we prevent these issues from happening like in the future again. And then like a lot of it's also just identifying big gaps. Like my job's really to identify gaps in our machining process, whether that's like, how do we improve it? What takes up a lot of time? Like, how do we make parts faster? Like all these different things that we need to work on. I kind of just identify them and then drive a lot of action. So every day I'm talking to like at least like 10 to 20 different people every day, like about all these different things that need to go on. I'm like running between like lots of different meetings, lots of different areas, figuring out like what's where, who do I need to talk to today. So it's just like constant change.
Great, thank you. All right, how about you, Alvin?
I think similar to what Yashna is saying is my day is very different from day to day. It depends on what issues I'm trying to solve. So beyond the technical work that I do, I also manage a remote site facility that we have to do testing in. So occasionally it'll be even silly things like yesterday I got an email from an inspector that says, hey, my propane tank is out of spec, and now I have to figure out how to put in crash bar so no one runs into the propane tank so it doesn't blow up. You know, it's something that's totally irrelevant to what I'm doing on a day-to-day, but it's things that have to be addressed. So it really varies, but some examples would be sometimes I might be spending time on a vehicle when a new software is dropped, testing it through its paces, making sure everything's working. Other times I'll be trying to figure out why fault codes are being tripped and what sensors may not be working, or like trying to track down shorts and harnesses. Other days would be like test plan creation, test report creation, talking to the customers or looking at data from other test facilities and figure out what's wrong and trying to figure out what the path forward is in terms of creating a solution for the problem. It rarely do I have, well, nowadays it's more with COVID and more working from home, there's more of sitting at home dealing with issues, but still a lot of just dealing with whatever issues that comes up, and it's all over the place. So yeah.
Yeah, it sounds quite similar to robotics actually. Like we're recently having trouble with sensors for robotics, so definitely see a connection there. All right, how about you, Lauren?
I'm gonna like repeat what everyone says, but it's always been different pretty much every day. With my old group, it was a lot more in the design realm. So I'd spend maybe a month doing CAD work and then doing drawings. And then once all the parts came in, I'd inspect them and put them together, and then maybe spend a week wiring and crimping and soldering. And then they'd go into the testing phase. Whereas with my current group, it's different as well. It can go from like reading research papers to see what other people are doing, or trying to get a better understanding of something that I'm working on, to when there's like a wind tunnel test, maybe somebody needs help mounting camera mounts or something to the side. Or somebody needs me to babysit a computer for a second to make sure that the program's working or something like that. With COVID, I've been doing way more from home. So like the last couple weeks, I've been trying to figure out why my finite element analysis isn't working or not giving the right output or stuff like that. So it's very different for all of that.
Nice. All right, and then a similar question along the lines of same thing. How has COVID changed your career experience? Because it's all had effect on all of us. So, Adriana, would you like to answer?
Yeah, so I was in my old position, which the job was to travel a year ago when COVID first hit. And so that was probably the biggest change that I saw, was just we had to, for being our US location, we had to kind of cover a lot of positions that people couldn't come into the US because they couldn't travel internationally. Or, you know, it was faster to have someone come in from the US than to do the 2-week quarantine, depending on what the policies were for traveling. And so that kind of shifted the focus there. And then now kind of in this position, a lot of the work that I'm doing is pretty easy to transition to working at home. So that's pretty fortunate. Although I will say, it's a completely different experience, right? And I'm sure you've experienced it with school to try to have meetings without having people physically there. I think I've done this transition to a brand new team during COVID, and I think that's been a little bit of an extra challenge as well, is, meeting new people that, you're supposed to be working with and have, these working relationships with, and kind of understand where they're coming from, and you kind of have this extra barrier between you. So yeah.
Yeah, for me at least, like I haven't really gotten to meet my teachers that much.
Yeah.
And so it's just a lot harder, right? So yeah, how about you, Yashna?
So I go into work every day. So I'm still in the office. We count as essential workers because we're on government contracts. But yeah, so like I go into the office every day, so that part hasn't really changed. Not everyone at work is working in person though. People who can be remote have been encouraged to work remotely. So there's a good chunk of people who I've never met in person. Everyone who I do meet, I probably would not recognize them without a mask because I'm wearing a mask 10 hours a day. And I only know like the top half of everybody's face now. Yeah, but I think like one of the biggest misses to me, and like obviously this is not like the most important thing given like we're in a pandemic, but like I lost like a huge social aspect of being at work, especially because during my internship, it was during like one of the first bouts of lockdowns, especially like because it's in LA, so it's like really bad over there. So like my internship was during a really bad bout of COVID, and like even now like everything's still in lockdown. So because of that, like I've lost like this huge socializing aspect because there's a big difference between talking to people at work and like just hanging out with them outside of work, like at social events, going to a happy hour, like all these different things you might do during a regular year, and we just can't do any of that right now. So that's been one of the big misses to me.
I see that. All right, how about you, Alvin?
Well, so like Yashna, our work is considered essential, and however, from a safety perspective, basically, unless you have a reason to be in the office, where you're working on hands-on work or something like that, a majority of our workforce is working from home. So I do spend a lot of time on on telecons and stuff like that, which sometimes it's harder to get some things done, between like smoke detectors that won't stop beeping in the background, or like people's dogs are barking and all that, or kids or whatever. So it's harder to get a lot of the more nitty-gritty stuff resolved, in my opinion, sometimes. But in terms of my personal role, like I said, I probably have a couple trips that normally I would have flown out somewhere to address issues or help with assembly of something, and all those trips are currently on hold. So I had to do a lot of troubleshooting over the phone, which can be another level of challenge because you can't see the hardware. You're describing where buttons are on computer screens and what they should be looking out for and what they should be pressing, and they're like, well, and they're describing the behaviors they're seeing, which half the time isn't very like comprehensive. But in terms of my actual my remote facility testing, that was still ongoing. So I still have a crew in a facility and we're still testing away. So it didn't really impact it from that aspect very much.
I see that. All right, thank you. And Lauren?
So with NASA, each of the centers are kind of doing their own thing in terms of COVID guidelines and following them. Ames Research Center here in Mountain View has been pretty strict about who can and cannot be on site. So, I mean, in the wind tunnel division, there's a skeleton crew that is still allowed to be there and doing work and tests, but it's the bare minimum. So I have been pretty much switched over to work from home till the foreseeable future, when they start letting more people back on site. So I'm not really a fan of working from home. I kind of miss the like hands-on aspect. So because I am working from home, a lot of my tasks are stuff to do on the computer, with finite element analysis and stuff like that. But that being said, there are some people on site doing the essential activities.
Yeah,
Well,
it sounds like a really. Okay, sorry, you can go.
No, I'll just throw this out there too. So we brought on a new hire. Literally, his first day was the day
Yeah.
before the lockdown. And he ended up spending the first 3 months of what should be a very hands-on, like learning position, reading manuals from home. So hopefully, by the time, people watching this graduate and go into a career, all this stuff will have blown over, but it definitely adds a whole extra layer of challenges, I think, for a new employee in a new company to be able to adapt to when they can't, or not in an office where they're surrounded by people working on these issues. So
Yeah, like when I was an intern, like that's when most people were work from home. And so like I had not met my manager in person for like the first half of my internship. And like I still remember like the day he finally popped by, I like didn't even recognize him because I had only ever seen like his badge icon on like all of our online meetings. So like it's crazy. And I have so many friends who had internships over the summer that were completely remote. So for like the entire summer, they only ever talked to people online, never met their team in person, never actually went on site to these companies they were working with. So it's just such a different experience.
Great, great. Let's see. All right, so let's move on to the next question. I'm thinking actually we're gonna switch up the questions a little bit. So, because I think it'll be more relevant. So, next question that we'll do is, what other careers do you work with? What are like, how did they use your expertise to contribute to the team? So yeah, we kind of want to also like look at like a variety of different jobs, right? Because obviously, we have four jobs here, but we also want to look at like the other people that you work with. So yeah, Adriana, could you go first?
Right. So on my team, we have a big variety of people. So we've got mechanical designers. We've got people who are doing project management or project leads. I think I mentioned safety being really important, so we have safety engineers that we work with quite regularly. And then as well as we have test engineers who are testing out prototypes that we're going back and forth with. Again, making sure that we can have everything set from once we do go into production. Yeah, I think that would be my off the top of my head list.
Great. How about you, Yashna?
Yeah, just like so many different people. So like just in the machine shop, when I'm there, there's like machinists who are like specialized in how to work with these machines, CNC programmers, so they write all the programs that actually go through and machine parts. There's like the shop floor supervisors, quality inspectors, a lot of different like manufacturing engineers who work on like the machining and assembly side. And then that's like just machine shop. Because of my role, I work with a lot of people who work in the foundry to cast materials, to cast parts, and also people who are specialized in like additive and 3D printing parts. And then later downstream, working with everyone who's working on assembly and testing. And then there's also like just communicating with design engineers, materials planners, production planners. Like just like there's so many different people who work on every single aspect of like a product from start to finish. And I mean, I'm lucky enough that I get to kind of work with all of them. So yeah, there's just so many different careers.
Yeah, it seems like a larger scale version of, what you do on a robotics team. It's pretty cool. All right, Alvin.
Yeah, add to, deal with a lot of the same ones that were sort of even mentioned, mechanics, electricians, but more even on the business side, program managers. You have business analysts that deal with like budgets and all that stuff. Deal with quality personnel, industrial safety as well as product safety. So industrial safety, more like stuff like hazardous material when you have like consumed oils and stuff like that, figure out how to dispose of or proper handling of it. Facilities have things like forklifts running around, cranes, things that need inspection, generators and air compressors, have maintainers for all those equipment, quality, logistics. And at least in the military, there's a lot more of a reliability and maintainability. Is, for example, the ability for a user to be able to fix the equipment. So to address things like work with the people who are developing the technical manual, the steps on how to use these things, how to fix these things, and how to even figure out how to, get a spare part on the shelf. For example, what configuration that's going to be. So that's like a logistics person. Really a little bit of everything. Software personnel, electrical engineers, material engineers, to deal with welders and drawings. I think the list really, procurement people, when you need to buy material, or the list goes on and on.
Yeah, again, I mean, it just seems like, every robotics team, you need every single sub team for a robotics team to function well. And again, it seems just a very similar concept to that, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and all those pieces need to be there for everything to kind of, for all your end products to get there. It's not just like, and not one part is really like less or more important than the others. It all kind of fits together to get the outcome that you need. So
definitely. All right, thank you. And Lauren?
There's a wide range of people. With my old team, I worked with a lot of scientists, and then there were like engineers that were specialized in specific roles. So like aerospace, mechanical, electrical, worked with people in the machine shop. With my current group, there's even more of a variety. Some people have degrees in physics or mathematics, or trying to think, there's all different education levels. There's people with PhDs, people with masters, people with bachelors, people who did the 2-year vocational school to specialize in a specific role. There are plenty of different roles that I've every summer there's a bunch of interns from various programs. In terms of like appealing to some of the people that might be in like the marketing or social media aspect, we have photographers, professional photographers on site that come by and do pictures during tests and stuff like that, so that they could put it in publications or social media or some of the like promotional videos that they film. There are, Alvin said, procurement. It's just like such a wide variety. There's people that specialize. We have an education department, so they do stuff like grants for robotics teams, or they do programs for organizing speakers to go to schools. It's just such a huge variety. It doesn't necessarily have to be engineering.
Cool. Also shows like, like a lot of big technology companies, basically have engineering attached to them. You think of that company, you think engineering, but it shows that you don't have to have an engineering degree to work at that company.
And you could be a technical writer, so you major in English or something like that, and you work on all the publications.
Yeah, it's a cool perspective. All right, our next question. This is the juiciest one. What have you learned being in the workplace, and how can that be applied to robotics teams. So yeah, this is the most popular question usually. So Adriana, would you like to start us off?
I get to go first. All right. So yeah, I mean, I think the learning experience goes both ways, right? I learned things in robotics that have helped me in my job, and there are things that I learned from my job that I bring to robotics. So I think from robotics, I learned, you have to do things in a team. You can't do anything by yourself, right? So you have to be able to reach out to people to get help that you need. Let's see. And I think also from being on a first team, I kind of just got exposed to a lot of the different solutions that are out there, I guess. Just like having that experience of knowing that you can have a problem, and there's a lot of ways to solve it, and there's something out there that's going to work, and you just have to figure it out. I think coming from my work, I have a huge appreciation of safety now. That's something that gets taken, really seriously because we have people on the line, and that's something that I bring to robotics as a mentor now. Oh, and then, sorry, I'm like looking at my notes because this, like you said, this one's the juicy one. The other one is documentation, which I know as a student was not my favorite thing. It's not the most exciting thing, but at work, we have tons and tons of documents. You have to be able to navigate them, and you have to be able to create them to share with other people so that you can get your ideas across and make sure that when you hand things over, things are going to be able to go to the next step. So yeah, that's another big one for me.
Great. All right. Yashna, want to go next?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want to repeat too much of what Adriana said, but like I definitely agree with everything she was saying. Like communication is so key. Like in robotics, like communication was always like super important, but sometimes you didn't realize how much because you really only had like 4 groups. But like in a workplace where there's like people in like 10 different buildings working on the same part, and like just like so many people, like you have to know who you need to communicate issues with. There are so many problems that sometimes just get resolved by looping in like 2 extra people and being like, hey, can you be part of this conversation? And then you're like, oh, wow, we just needed the design engineer in the room about this discussion on a problem so that they could help change the design to fix it. Things like that. Documentation, super important. One thing in particular that I really bring into the workplace that I did a lot in robotics and like would probably go back and like do even more is like I'm a big fan of to-do lists and action items, especially because I will usually drive projects that are being worked on in groups of like 10 plus people. It's like having a list of like, these are the things that we need to get done this week. These are the people who are going to get them done, and this is when they're going to get it done by. Like putting a name and a date next to an action item instead of just saying it in a meeting, it makes a world of difference. Like it makes such a difference. Oh my God. Yeah, like that's a big one. And also like going back to communication, also just knowing how to communicate with different types of people. Like if you're like in robotics, like when you're communicating between mechanical and programming, you aren't speaking like the same language. Like people in mechanical are going to have their own lingo they use. People in programming have their own lingo. And being able to navigate, like especially, maybe this is a SpaceX thing, but like in general workplace, acronyms get used a ton. So like if you don't know those acronyms or where to figure out what those acronyms mean, like that's another big key in communication. So I think like those really, and just like timelines and how you set timelines and deadlines and work on really crunched, aggressive timelines.
A little fun question. What are some of the sub-team acronyms, lingos that you use?
Oh my God. There's like, I mean, just for parts, like, so machine parts, there are 45 different parts on the Raptor engine that go through machining, and each of them has their own acronym. So unless you know the parts really well, you have no idea what people mean when they're like OPB, OPH, FPB, OTP, like, just like so many different ones. But then people also refer to sometimes general processes like, oh my God, I'm like blanking. I cannot think of any good examples right now. But it's just like parts or like nicknames for things so that you're not like saying the whole name all the time.
It gets really confusing when you start doing multiple programs and they use the same acronyms. Yeah.
Yeah, there was like one acronym I tried to look up on our like company directory page, and like 6 different groups use it, like aviation versus avionics versus like machining. Like they all use it, but in totally different contexts. And I was like, what am I looking at?
There's only so many letters.
But
That's
yeah,
great.
start a dictionary. That's the key.
Nice. All right. Again, yeah, so it's just like, what have you learned? How can you apply it to robotics teams? So Alvin, can you
go? So I guess I'm at a point where I don't know where I learned it from anymore. But I would say, and it's already been mentioned, communications, but I'll go a little farther. I find it to be very helpful to, if you want something done, don't just communicate that, but communicate why and how you want something done. A lot of times that empowers the person you're communicating with to understand what you're trying to get accomplished. If you just tell someone, I want a hole drilled here. Okay, well, that tells you need a hole in the part, that's fine. But, if you explain you need a hole drilled here so that this other piece can fit in it and can freely move, that person then can take that information and kind of apply a lot more of understanding to it, so that if they see an issue or if they have questions, it helps that understanding a lot more. And it might be from like being able to, something I don't know, refined talking, communicating with students, or even just coworkers. I think it's just one thing that's just being able to really calmly explain, even though sometimes like it means a little bit longer email or a little bit longer message to establish that communication. Just setting that baseline makes it a lot more effective in terms of getting the outcome that you want. So I don't know whether that was something I learned from work or from robotics, but it's something that I've applied to both, and I find it to be very useful in both.
Yeah, I can definitely see where you're going with that, because like, as like, I manage the FTC team, so if I want people to like do hardware stuff, especially after rookies, it's definitely good to give them instructions on how to do it and what it's used for. So I can definitely relate to what you're saying on there for sure.
Well, and I would say even I have talked to my colleagues, who are maybe have 10, 20 or more years experience than I do, but when you're trying to communicate a concept of, for example, if I have a concern about the way this thing is, the logic on this part is programmed, by explaining the issues you have with the program and kind of going into the reasonings why you have those issues, it kind of helps them understand where you're coming from. It's not so much that like, more than they do, they obviously have a lot more background, but if you can explain the details, it kind of shows that A, you've thought about it, and B, like, these are the reasons why I have this concern. That helps them being able to kind of come to the realization that, oh, okay, I know where he's coming from. Maybe I'm totally wrong, and I'll say a lot of times I have been totally wrong, but at least that establishes that communication, and you can have that conversation to kind of get to the root of the issue.
Okay, I see that. Cool. All right, how about you, Lauren?
So there's a lot of skills that I learned in robotics that like I developed more when I started working. So, I mean, just in the technical sense, CAD and all that kind of stuff, I got the baseline when it came to doing it in robotics. But when I got to work, I got significantly better at it. And I try and take that and bring it back so that I can funnel it into workshops and stuff like that, so that students can benefit from it. One of the biggest things I think I got from robotics was it's along the lines of communication, but it's more in the networking realm, especially at competitions where you're talking to other teams, in the pits, trying to get a better sense of like how they function as a team, how they're different, what they do differently, stuff like that. You make a lot of friendships, and connections, and that has kind of like turned over into the work world. It's pretty nice to like make those connections at other companies now, and talk to people in other departments and figure out like what they're doing. Um, I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's see. And also, this one's just off the top of my head. But any robotic skills that helped you get the job in the first place? Anyone can answer, by the way. If there's no answers, yeah, it's totally okay.
For me, it's a lot of the technical skills. So learning CAD in high school, just the generic concepts of designing a robot and building in a 6-week time period and figuring out like the order of operations to do everything and planning and everything. Those skills were stuff that I could put on my resume and helped me get a job or internship.
I think we had an alum where she had an interview and it was for an EV car company, and she was shown a 2-speed gearbox, and I guess most of the other candidates weren't able to kind of explain what it was, but the question to her was like, can you tell me what this is and what this does? And since she had that experience with having a 2-speed gearbox on her robot, she was able to kind of talk through it. And I don't know if that was the deciding factor for her getting the internship, but she got that internship as a result of it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I mean, for my job, like when I interviewed for my internship in the summer, like it's like a couple different interviews and they get really technical. And for one of my technical interviews, the guy asked like about all these different projects I worked on in school. And then I like briefly mentioned like, yeah, I did robotics in high school. And he was like, let's talk about that one. So like for that interview specifically, like all my robotics experience was more what we talked about for like 20 minutes rather than like labs and things I've done in school. Mostly because he really wanted to know like how I went through like a design and build process when things broke or when you test things and they don't work the way you expect. How do you troubleshoot that? How do you fix it? Like, how do you figure out what the problem is and then go and actually address it? Like that entire process that you go through in build season, because you're working on this robot from start to finish, and then you compete with it. So then you're going through the test processes you would see at work. Like, because robotics was really the only time I'd ever seen that, like outside of now work, like that was a big talking point in an interview. So I think like robotics gives a lot of valuable experience, especially for initial interviews, like when you're looking for internships and first jobs.
Going off of what Yashna says, a lot of the generic questions that they ask in interviews are like, name a time where something didn't go the way that you planned it and how did you deal with it? Or name a time where like teamwork or collaboration or there was a gap in communication and how did you address it? And that's all stuff that you can relate back to your experiences in robotics. So it kind of like prepares you to answer those questions, or it gives you a good experience to point to.
Or name a time when you did not agree with someone on a topic and had to make a decision on what to do. So many behavioral questions that come from robotics.
It gets really eye-opening. I'm now in a point where I have to ask those questions, and it actually is very eye-opening. The answers actually really make a big difference when depending on how they answer those questions, because it really comes across, at least from an employer's perspective, how they tackle problems, right? So it's definitely relevant stories to tell.
Yeah, and there was like one interview I had where we were talking about like troubleshooting, like a different interview. And I gave an example from like a work experience during an internship, but it was the same thing from robotics where it's like, hey, this thing wasn't working. Like, what was your first step? And it was like, well, first I checked if the power was on. Like, the robot's not communicating. Is the battery, like, is the power switch on? Is the battery plugged in? Like, some of those basic checks that we all think are like dumb checks are actually like engineers are like, yeah, that's a really good place to start. Like, do you have a power source? Does it go to the next place? Does it go to the next step?
Yep. One of the questions I've started asking is what to do if you go out to your car and it won't, you turn a key and nothing happens. And if I'm hiring a technical person, calling AAA is not the answer. And I've had that as an answer. So, you know, having gone through the experience that we have through the robotics program is definitely something that helps reinforce that.
All right, yeah, thank you guys for answering. So now we have some other questions. I think we'll probably continue doing the same thing. It's just anyone can answer. You can build off of each other. It can be pretty chill. So what advice would you give someone new just launching into your career? Or like what things did you wish you knew when you were coming into your career? So yeah, that's the question.
So I would say, you know, go in with an open mind. They're the kind of, I think, at least in my experience, there's a lot of times when I have new employees that might be like, they're afraid they don't know the stuff, but coming in, especially as an entry-level career position, you know, don't be afraid. You know, that's kind of the expectation. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Certainly, like I also say, don't wait for work to be assigned to you. You know, when things are slow, ask for work or get involved and ask questions and observe. I think being able to be proactive about it definitely helps. I don't know, what else, ladies?
I would agree. I think like especially for entry-level jobs, like you're not expected to be an expert in your field, so like asking questions is really important. More manufacturing specific, but like shadow people when you get the opportunity. Like I've gotten to shadow some of the machinists and actually see how they run these huge machines. And it's like you're not going to get that experience otherwise. Like there's no other way you're going to learn that unless you just like shadow people. And that kind of applies to any jobs. Like if you're interested in something someone does, ask if you can see it in more detail. Most of the time, people like to talk about what they do. So like anyone will talk about what they're working on with you as long as you're nice about it and they don't have urgent things going on. And another one that's like a little more specific to a company type, like for startups especially, like don't be afraid to set boundaries on like how much time you're spending at work and on projects. This is something I learned a lot through my internship and I'm still figuring out right now, but it's like really important. When you start a new job, you always want to be like show you're super committed and not leave before your manager sometimes and like all these things. But at a company where everybody's used to working 10 to 12-hour days and you know like you do not want to be spending 12 hours a day at work, you just have to set those limits for yourself. Like that's sometimes a little hard as a new employee.
So that's interesting with the machinist, though. I would say one aspect I would throw in there is that I know it's general golden rule, right? Treat everyone how you want to be treated. You'll find, especially at least personal opinion, personal experience, machinists and mechanics tend to not have a very high opinion of engineers. And a lot of times it's because they get drawings or instructions that makes no sense whatsoever through the years of experience. Like if you want a hole that's tapped like this much into a piece of material and it's a 440 hole and it's like, what is this kid thinking? You know, so certainly a lot of that opinion comes from a lot of experience. But I think, at least in my experience, if you go in with, you know, an open mind and learn from them, you know, there's certainly a lot of knowledge there from anyone that you interface with a lot of times. And just go in with an open mind, be nice, ask questions, and really just the one I'll throw in there is every once in a while, a box of donuts does wonderful things. So just kind of random hints here and there.
Yeah, also oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna like, to go off of that also, like if you're ever in a position where you're writing instructions or trying to come up with a plan on how to do something and you know that you're not the person who's doing it, you should still make sure you could do it. Like that's been like a general rule of thumb that I have, and like I make sure like MEs who I work with, like machining engineers and manufacturing engineers follow, is if you're writing a set of instructions, you should be able to do it before you hand it off to a bunch of other people, because it's only like when you try and do something yourself, you realize like, oh, this step's really hard. Like I thought this would take 10 minutes and it took me 2 hours to do. Like that's not okay. Like we should fix this. So yeah, that's part of like the golden rule of like, you don't want other people doing work that you yourself cannot do or like think is like horrible work.
I think my comment was more along the lines of like when it comes to applying to jobs or internships, even if you don't check all the boxes on the listed requirements, if you fit most of them, apply anyway. Most of the time, it's not someone who actually, it's normally like a hiring manager or someone who's not very familiar with the position who writes those kind of things. So they're not exactly sure what the actual engineering team is looking for or what skills are needed on a day-to-day basis. So, I mean, if you hit most of the marks, but you miss a couple, apply anyway, because you might be surprised, you might still get the position.
Agreed.
Interesting point. Sorry, I cut you off.
Oh no, I just said agreed.
Mhm.
Okay, cool. All right, this is exciting. We have a YouTube chat question. So, what are ways that you've actively taken to advance your career?
I don't know about actively, but one thing I have done is make myself indispensable in the sense that, you know, when we started having issues with the system, you know, one of our experts retired, and basically I took it upon myself to figure out how to learn the new software and interpret and understand the data, to where, so even though technically my background's in mechanical, I was basically the one to have established a list of protocols to figure out, okay, here's how you use this tool. Here is, you know, things you need to look out for, put a whole like document together and make that available to everyone that asks, and basically being able to get that experience and get that knowledge, so that a lot of times when someone has a problem with a vehicle, they'll come to me and ask for it in search of answers. So from that perspective, I think that was one of the things that being able to be the one that everyone comes to for answers certainly helps you in terms of kind of being able to advance in your career.
So I still consider myself very early career because I just finished my master's degree. But over the last couple years, I have been able to basically explore what I like and what I don't like. And I'm using that information that I've gathered about maybe I don't like doing this specific task, or I'm not super interested in this particular topic. And I'm using that information for what I plan to do in the future. So I'm kind of like creating a roadmap as to where I want to get and how I want to get there using that information.
I'd say like a small thing, and again, I have not like advanced in terms of positions in my job, but like kind of from internship to full time and trying to like snag that deal. I'd say one little thing is like owning the work you do. I felt like in school there's a lot of like, don't be arrogant, like you don't want to like come off as arrogant by like saying like, oh man, I did this and I did this and I did this. But there's like a good distinction between like owning the work you do versus like bragging about it unnecessarily. But like you do need to own the work you do and make sure it's visible to people around you. Because if you're working quietly in a corner, no one's really gonna like see what you're doing and realize the impact you've made, even though it could be a huge impact. So it's just like making sure you take ownership of that and you're like, yeah, I worked on this huge project. Like it could be like you were in a group of people, but you still did impactful work and you're making sure that's visible.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good point of like, take opportunities as they come to you and make sure that people know that you're working on them, and like what impact that has had.
Yeah, another way. Right, you can go.
Oh, I was just gonna say, if you have opportunities, I was just say jump in on them. For example, if there's an opportunity to travel and go work on something, it might be hard work, but certainly, assuming you're working a job you enjoy, it's a challenge. I would say like take on those opportunities where they come.
Don't be afraid to make mistakes. You're young.
Even when you're old, don't be afraid to make mistakes. I'm saying that from experience. Sometimes being wrong and having that conversation helps you get to an answer. I'm wrong at least once or twice a month. That's okay. Sometimes more, but yeah, it's. I think having those conversations and explain why you think you're right, and then being proven you're wrong. That's okay. Don't take it hard. It's like, okay, you learn something and move on, and at least you got an answer. And hopefully document it as noted and move on. So.
Yeah, to add on to your point, I mean, in robotics, we're wrong plenty of times. Like we just tested a mechanism today that didn't work at all, and we're learning from it, and we're going to learn from it and be better next year too. So that's definitely a way that your point could apply to robotics too.
Yep.
Let's see. All right. Do we have any more questions? Let me check. Here's a fun one. To the people who use CAD, what CAD softwares do you use?
At ASML, we use NX.
Same.
NX?
We use SolidWorks and Creo, but I tend to err on the side of SolidWorks because it's my preference.
We use Creo.
Yeah. We use
Nice.
Fusion 360 a little bit too.
Dealer's choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, we used to use SolidWorks too on robotics, but we like Onshape a lot better. Ooh, yes, we got an actual question. What are some tips and tricks that you have for interviews?
Practice. That would be my biggest advice for an interview is just practice with someone. I think all the interviews that I did, the ones that I felt the most confident for were the ones that I was able to have someone ask me questions and kind of get all the nerves out beforehand. But yeah, the more you can do ahead of time to prepare and practice what you're going to say, and think of those questions of tell me of a time when things went wrong, and what did you do to fix it. Have those ready.
Something that really helped me was I actually made a Word document that has a bunch of pictures of previous projects that I worked on. It's kind of like a design portfolio. And I would bring that into the interview. So when they had a question, I had some sort of visual thing to point to. And it made my answers to questions a lot better because I could specifically point to something and describe it or talk about a specific project or experience.
Yeah, I would say like in prepping for interviews, like make sure you have like 4 to 5 different like projects, that you worked on that you can talk about in different respects. Or not necessarily like 4 to 5, like even like having at least 3, because you don't want to answer every single question with like the first project that comes to your mind. Because once you talk about one, it's going to be that same one that comes to your mind. So having that variety. And I think the other one is like know your resume. Like whatever's on your resume, if you're in an interview and you haven't looked at your resume in a while, make sure you know it, because most interviews will start by just walking through your resume and talking through skills you have on there, things you've listed as experience or like talking points. And also like don't over exaggerate on your resume. If you say you're proficient in a skill that you've maybe dabbled with once ever, be honest about that. Like, it's okay to have introductory skills to things, because you might get fact checked on it.
Well, now throw that, especially with entry level, and this is where, as students start now, when you're in college, do things like, mini Formula Baja or whatever. There's a lot of extracurricular activities. Depending on this college you go to, you might only have like one senior project or some, along those lines. You really want to get as much experience as you possibly can out there. Like I said, I'm at a point where I'm starting to interview people for jobs, and one of the things I see is, when you only have worked on one project in your last 4 years of college, and that's the only thing you can reference, it's hard to use that one example to answer all the questions. It was like your failures, your successes, all that tied to that one project. It doesn't show a lot of depth. And that's where I'm bringing this up now is, while you're still in high school or you're going to college, now is the time to get those experience, whether it's like an after school program or if you're developing your own software on the side or, whatever. Those are all really good talking points when you get to an interview process to be able to kind of get you an edge.
And you can reference projects that you did for a specific class if a class has a semester project or something like that.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, get as many like projects and experience as you can while you're in this phase of your life. Just sometimes, especially some of the class projects, don't tend to provide a lot of depth. Not like robotics, right? Robotics, and that's where we reference this whole like last hour and some, right? Is there's a lot of depth and experience you can reference, and that type of project and that type of experience, I think, really make you stand out as a candidate when you get to that interview process.
I would say that even applies to like skill sets. Like, try and grow your skill sets wherever you can. Like, not even through a project, but like, if you don't know any coding, maybe try and learn some coding language on your own time. Like, that's a really cool skill set to have and showcase. Or like, if you've never used tools before, but it's something that might help you in a job you're interested in, see if you can take like a class on it, or if there's like some way you can learn those. Like, try and build skills on your own, like even if it's not like a necessity to any projects.
I think that's a great point. It's so for example, even if your degrees in mechanical, for example, if you can show that depth of yeah, I've dealt with systems, I've dealt with software, or how at least the principles behind them, I think that makes you a lot more valuable as an employee for most positions that's out there.
Thank you guys. Okay, so we have like 8 minutes till 8:30. Yeah, we could do another question. Okay, so did you have a role model you were inspired by, and how did they inspire you?
All of my mentors. I mean, they give great life advice. I still go talk to Alvin all the time about what I should do with my job or what I'm looking for, or just general life questions, how to pay taxes. I don't know.
Hope you know that by now. So,
Yeah.
all right, that's knocking your door.
I'm still figuring that out. But I mean, like I mentioned, Mark Leone was my first boss at NASA, and he gave me some great advice as to career oriented stuff and where my skills are and what I should be doing. So basically my mentors, pretty much.
Yeah, I would agree. I think like mentors in robotics were like definitely role models in terms of like what I could aspire to by going into engineering. My parents are like pretty big role models. Like, they both work in tech fields, so like I'll turn to them for advice a lot of the time, and just like listen to like things they struggled with and try and like work through those in my everyday life too. And like right now, like I see like role models in some of the peers and like some of the people who I work with who are like super skilled, super knowledgeable. And every time I talk to them, I'm like, oh my God, give me that knowledge. Like, how do I get to a point where I become like so knowledgeable in this field and like so trusted in this area? So I think it's just like people around you, like there's so many different people around you who can be such great role models.
I think, especially like if I think back to when I was applying to colleges, I really like looked up to some of the seniors that were on the team when I was a freshman. People who I had, worked closely with through robotics and who I saw going into schools, and I knew about their work ethic and kind of how they approached doing things. And so that was just kind of a good, it's good to see someone like a step ahead of you, and to kind of see where you want to go. And I was able to, when I toured at Scripps, one of our alums was at Harvey Mudd, and I was able to connect with her and kind of get some more insight on that. So this would be, pre-career, but still really useful connections to have.
Yeah, and when your peers are in college, you can start asking them questions about, oh, how would you go about studying for this kind of topic or class or stuff like that. They have great advice.
Yeah, the alum the person who was a senior when I was a freshman who ended up working at SpaceX was like a huge role model. Like she helped me do mock interviews when I was first doing interviews. Like even after she graduated, like I'd always keep in touch and be like, hey, how is SpaceX life? Like that sounds really cool. Like what are you doing there? So it's just like people who are in positions where you're like, wow, I want to get there one day. They're good people to talk to and just ask like, how did you get there?
So when I was a student, I had mentor. So I was on an FRC team too, back a long time ago. So yeah, I think the one thing that stood out for me though, in terms of aspiration, is the passion that was involved in it. Being able to work full time and still be able to spend time with the students, and kind of being able to have that passion to explain and just really be involved in the different technical aspects of it. I think that's yeah. So same answers as everyone else.
Great. All right, it's 8:26. So I think we might wrap up the live stream. So I'd like to thank you guys all for attending, and to thank 1967 and all of you guys, mentors. This was a really cool panel. So yeah, thank you guys all for doing this. This was really productive. I personally learned a lot. So
thank you.
Yeah. Good luck with your build season.
Thank you. Yeah, and good luck with all your careers. Yeah.